Thank you so much for having me. I'm sorry I sound nasally. My son and I are both under the weather. We were canvassing in that really bad storm on Saturday, and so I think it caught up to us. You'll hear Moana in the background because it's a way to make sure that's his Zoom meeting. So this will be mine. So just in case he comes by, you'll get to meet CJ. But it's so nice to be here with all of you. You know, when, especially with groups like this, when they introduce me and they're introducing me as a representative and they use words like that or incumbent, I think to myself, it's actually, I'm a mom. So I'm a mom first. It's the reason I ran. You know, the short and quick version is I had a career, became a mom, decided to stay home. And then in 2016, after the presidential election, I've grown up in Northwest Miami-Dade my entire life. There's the little one. Just wave. And it's an area that, for those that don't know geographically, it's in this northwest corner, and we also have Southwest Broward, which is the Miramar section. I'm sure that they regret how they drew that map because it allowed us to flip a seat. But we had just sort of felt that positions were being handed over to folks. There was a lot of seats that were just uncontested, and we would just not show up. And so we started a club, essentially like you guys, just regular people wanting to create change. And we said, we're going to start knocking on doors, and we're going to build the foundation so that in 2018, we can chip away, and then some crazy person will run in 2020 and we can flip it. So it was very, very much a long game. And we did that for about a year. And then February 14th happened. And I felt as though I needed to be surrounded by people that felt the sense of loss that I felt, that although I had not lost someone specifically in Parkland, I felt like a sense of responsibility for my son to do more and not just share my opinion or my grief on social media. And I found myself on a bus that many of you, or buses that many of you actually rode, and we shared space and energy and didn't even know it at the time, but the Rally to Tally. And that 13-hour trip to Tallahassee from Miami sort of changed everything for me. I was given an opportunity to speak in front of the Senate, called out Marion Hammer because I was just so angry at how she ran that Capitol. And on the way home, a lot of the students that were on our bus asked me if I would ever run for office. And I gave them 27 reasons why I would never do it, starting with that I curse a lot, and that my son was too small. And the group, that club that had started, had an intervention of sorts and came to my house and said, you know that crazy person we've been waiting for to run? Well, it's you. And so we fought, and we were outspent $500,000 to about $75,000, much of which the party came in at the very end and helped out because they saw that the numbers were on our side. But the idea wasn't necessarily to lose, but our first priority wasn't to win. I just kept thinking, especially after a tragedy like Parkland, how could somebody just step into a role and never have to answer? Like he would never have to explain what his position was, because essentially the Speaker of the House had anointed him as the next state representative. So that was the idea, was to push an agenda, was to make sure that they were making commitments to people in our communities. And lo and behold, we flipped the seat, and we did so by almost 7 points. Which goes to show that, one, money doesn't determine everything, but two, that the outcome doesn't necessarily always come as immediate, or the progress that we want or need come as immediate as we want or need it to, but we still have to keep showing up and we have to keep fighting. And the irony is that the first bill I ever debate on the House floor is the arming of teachers. And so it was almost a year to the day that I had spoken at the Senate hearing as a mom and activist, and now I was in the House chamber debating that bill. And anyone that saw that debate, the bill sponsor, Representative Jennifer Sullivan, doesn't care for me too much, because I push. I absolutely push, and you will see my hand on my hip as I ask questions. But there was one defining moment. I think I was still nervous as a freshman legislator. I had been chosen by my caucus to sort of close on this debate because they knew how personal it was for me. And she said, you know, many of the questions you're asking, we already handled this last year. And she was talking in regards to the MSD bill. And she said, and you weren't here. And so when it came back to me, I said, Representative Sullivan, you're absolutely correct. I wasn't in here. I was actually outside protesting against the decisions that you've made. And so since I'm here now you have to answer my questions. And so that is my role. We are in the minority party. Many of the things that we put forth don't even get a hearing, but we absolutely owe it to all of you. We owe it to your children to hold their feet to the fire and make sure that they answer, and hopefully put them on record for whether negative or positive things, but something that they then have to go back home and they have to defend. Because if we don't even make them do that, if we just sort of roll over, then we're really not doing our job. And so here I am running for re-election. You know, it's still just as hard, probably harder, because I feel like everyone loves you when you're running for office for the first time. Once you're elected, you're just a politician to many. And I am surrounded by Republican seats. So I'm not the elected that gets invited to the Easter egg hunt or to the 4th of July barbecue. I'm left out. My cities and towns do not come and meet with me. And it's all part of the game. And I play it. I just play it by my own rules. And so here we are. So again, thank you so much for having me. You know, but mostly I kind of say that story because I'm a mom first, and I'll be a mom my entire life, as opposed to a state representative. And one of the first interviews I did as a candidate, they said, you know, how do you feel that the gentleman that's running against you has called you just a mom? And I said, no, he's right. Because while I take this interview, I'm making sure that my kid's eating, I'm designing flyers, I'm also putting out an ad on Facebook, and I just put the chicken in the crock pot. So you're absolutely correct. I am just a mom, and you're going to have a lot of just moms in the house now. And so it's a title that I wear proudly. So super weighted question because I never like being a negative Nelly about it, but I am very realistic so that folks understand how important these down ballot races are, especially in a presidential year, because the big races sort of take out all the oxygen, as they should. But it's really these down ballot races that are debating and deciding your everyday issues. So one of the best parts of serving has been my freshman class. So I was one of 6 flips that we had in the state. And our freshman class was, including a special election, there were 17 of us. And so we were almost the majority of the minority caucus. And we went in there with we all come from different walks of life, but the one thing we knew we wanted was a lot more action and a lot more force, not playing politics as usual. And so from the very beginning, in that first session, the one that I mentioned, of the arming of teachers, the freshman class came together. So on weekends when everyone had kind of gone back home, the freshman class stayed in Tallahassee. And we basically went down a list of bills that had been introduced, bills that had never seen the light of day, so that everyone could pick a priority and we could sort of come at it collectively as opposed to one-offs. And so in my case, I've ran this bill 2 years in a row, which is not allowing firearms in childcare facilities. Obviously, as the mother of a young son, that was something that was very near and dear to me. But I co-sponsored all of the other bills. So again, we all worked together to make sure that there was that no one was by themselves, right? So whether it's Representative Carlos Guillermo Smith on banning assault rifles, or Representative Tina Polsky on making sure that gun shops are locking up their guns. So we've come at it from a bunch of different angles. And I foresee that we will continue to do that. um, in the hopes that something will move. Now, what I will say is that another thing that we did, and that this was now, I can't believe it's been a year. So after that first session, going into the second year, we called for a special session after the tragedy that happened in El Paso. Representative Fernandez, who's in the South Miami area, and myself actually led the efforts with many of the members of Moms Demand and other organizations, of basically saying, okay, so you don't hear the bills. Here's what we are asking for. Here are the top four. Let's go to a special session so that we can just discuss this. And the answer that we were told was session was right around the corner. There was no reason for a special session. And, you know, that was the quote they gave to the Herald, but we knew that no bill was going to be heard. And sure enough, no bill was heard. So it's the same thing that they've done with COVID. We asked for a special session, and they don't want to be put on the board for these kinds of things. So what is the plan moving forward is that we continue to do that, I think, just a lot more aggressively. I think that we have an opportunity to flip more seats this time around. It's going to be a few cycles before we take over the House. And that's just realistic. That's not being pessimistic. It's just we need to see what the maps are going to look like after this redistricting. But we have a lot of seats that we never competed in. And so these issues now become a platform issue. And so what my hope is that as we get more and more numbers and the pressure increases, that eventually, you know, we're able to at least get a committee hearing for a bill, because, you know, we debated whether or not dogs could be allowed into bars. Like, we actually debated that on the House floor, and that's just an embarrassment to the Florida legislature that that's what we're doing, but we're not talking about gun control. Unfortunately, I think that the House specifically has gotten so bipartisan, has just become so partisan, and has become so entrenched in like rhetoric that we're not really given an opportunity to compromise. Like, because there's never anything that comes to the table for us to be able to do that. And so you'll have representatives that will, swing for the fences, and then there's others that'll put in things that are a little bit more sensible. But the truth of the matter is that if the Speaker of the House, the President of the Senate, and the governor do not have an appetite for it, it just won't happen. And we saw what happened with Senator Galvano, that even entertaining it, his own sort of party kind of turned on him. So, you know, we just have to keep at it. And that's why elections have consequences. It's a very long-winded answer, but it's steps that are involved in it. It's not, unfortunately, one just magical answer. I wish there was. The women. Oh my God, the women. The women that I serve with are just absolutely amazing. You don't see a lot of like the pettiness or competition. I think that things have gotten so dire in our state that many of us that ran for the first time really recognize that even people from our own party have not gotten it right. And that, you know, in some of the interactions, it's either we're not being tough enough, or we're just sort of saying thank you every time they throw crumbs at us. And so to be surrounded by women that I honestly feel are smarter than I am, and are much more patient and much more reserved and much more calm, was beautiful, because it just sort of balanced it out. Nobody was trying to be like anybody else. I'm sure if you asked our caucus, I'm known as the passionate one, because I've cried on that floor. I've poured my heart out on that floor because every issue that I ever grab the mic for, I take absolutely personally. And I've recently started telling folks, if your elected official doesn't take issues personally, you got to find yourself a new elected official, because you have to walk in there and you have to fight as though people's lives are on the line, because they are. And you may not know them and it may not touch you, but you absolutely have to do it. And so I think to be surrounded by a group of women that have never shamed me or made me feel less than for crying and being so vulnerable in the House floor has just sort of, I guess, reiterated how powerful being vulnerable can be. So to me, that was a pleasant surprise, that even though I make a lot of the men extremely uncomfortable with my vulnerability, it's become my superpower. And I owe that to the women that I'm surrounded with, or by. But you know, I want to just really sort of hammer home that the work that you all do is so important, even if the result is not visible in the way that we all need it or imagine it to be. But in just 2 years, as I run to committee, I've seen that group of red shirts outside just get bigger and bigger. And there is absolute power to that. And so when you feel discouraged and feel that it's not happening at the speed that we need it to, just know that it does, as long as we keep showing up. You know, one of the big wins, and I'm sorry I was actually the one in a rush, but I really want to share this with you guys because I need you to understand that sometimes it just does take longer. One of the biggest wins that we had my freshman year was the firefighter cancer coverage bill. And it's a bill that has been around for a long time. And it's a very vanilla, very common sense bill, which is basically firefighters are at a much ridiculous higher risk of dying of cancer because of the profession. And so, not to get into the weeds of that bill, but that bill's been around for a really long time. And the unions have been working that bill and working that bill and working that bill. And eventually, when it came to this specific bill, the gloves came off when it came to the Speaker of the House in that particular union. And different approaches were taken. And one of them was, I guess, to shame the Speaker, that he wouldn't meet with the widows of the firemen. He wasn't meeting with the parents of those that have died in the fire service. And it wasn't until local papers started covering that the tide changed. And so this bill went from being dead in the middle of session to being heard, bypass 3 committees, get to state affairs, and be heard on the House floor within 1 week. And that vote was unanimous, and it passed, and it was signed into law in that year. And so sometimes you got to be a little creative, but always maintaining the pressure on those that are in office, because there may be some that are untouchable. And what I mean by that is that it may be a really safe district, but there are others that aren't. And I've said this to you guys when you come to my office, that I love seeing you and I love hugging all of you, but go and show up 3 times as strong in the ones that you need their vote, because you know how some of us are going to vote, and we're going to always have your back. But show them how big you are so that they see the pressure and they start feeling the pressure, because that's the only time that it's going to change. So those after November 3rd, check to see by how many votes somebody won a district. Those really small margins, those are the ones you got to go hit, and you got to hit them hard, because if they just won it, they can lose it the next time around. So keep at it. Thank you all so much for what you do. And just know that, you know, I'm not done fighting. So any way that you can help, whether it's phone banking or postcards or walking with us, or even sharing our information on social media, that adds exposure. Please just know that it's appreciated and welcome.